how much do you really know about your reproductive health and its impact on your future family? In this episode, we are blowing the lid off male reproductive health, exposing myths, revealing game-changing lifestyle strategies, and giving you really a holistic roadmap to optimize your fertility and overall vitality. Welcome back to The Naked Connection. This is the show that supports driven men to reach sexual mastery and build deep connections. Take a moment and make sure that you hit subscribe right now so that you don't miss a single episode. You and that special someone are going to thank you. I'm Kirsten, and today we're diving deep into the world of male fertility with insights that I know will change everything that you thought you knew. We are joined today by Gabriela Rosa. She is a renowned fertility specialist, a reproductive health educator, and a Harvard University Award scholar. With her team, she has helped over 140,000 couples understand their own fertility better. And she is here today to break down misconceptions, explore how environmental factors are secretly sabotaging your reproductive potential, and sharing holistic strategies that can dramatically improve your fertility and really your life overall. So get ready to explore your capacity to really create a legacy in this world. This could quite literally change your future. You guys, let's get some. Gabriela Rosa, welcome to The Naked Connection. Super excited to have you here today.
Absolutely. Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
This topic of fertility is something that is becoming more and more of a conversation piece and more important in relationships. And I know historically there's been a lot of focus placed on the woman's fertility. And I am curious when it comes to men's fertility, what is the most common, misconceptions or pieces that we aren't often hearing about that men might benefit from understanding?
I love that question. I'd love to break myths in particular. So this is a great place to start. I think that the number one thing that misconceptions about is the fact that fertility is a female issue. There's nothing further from the truth. The reality is that when a couple is not successful at either conceiving or keeping a healthy pregnancy to term, it's a 50-50 equation. In fact, if we were to get very granular about it, we would say that the ability of a couple to take home a baby lies 40% on female factor, which is anything to do with the female herself, then 40% to do with the male himself, and then, of course, 20% to do with embryonic factor and any other issues at the beginning. Mm-hmm. The problem that I often see in terms of this is that the idiosyncratic piece, the other is usually what people and clinicians even place the most focus on. Because when it comes to understanding why a couple isn't conceiving or keeping a healthy pregnancy to term, there isn't usually the deep dive that is required to figure out what the issue is. And so most couples end up being diagnosed with unexplained whatevers, whether it's infertility, miscarriage, or whatever else. But if you really look at what it takes to have a successful pregnancy and a baby at the end of that pregnancy, 50% of what is required is the input of the male and 50% is the input of the female. Right. In real terms, fertility is a team sport and it needs to be looked at in that way. And also another very important thing here that often isn't talked about is the fact that if you do have difficulty conceiving, difficulty keeping a pregnancy to term, the underlying reasons as to why that happens to begin with will have an impact, obviously, in the immediate term, which is the fact that somebody wants to have a baby and they're not quite there yet. But it also will have an effect in that couple's and that individual's long term. And what do I mean by that? Usually the reason as to why infertility or miscarriage occurs have other biochemical triggers or underlying factors like health conditions or symptoms from health conditions that are latent and remain latent, causing that inability of achieving a healthy pregnancy to term, but that later can actually develop into real health conditions. For example, let's say if a man has insulin resistance, that whatever health factors are contributing to that insulin resistance will develop into further health conditions down the track. In the short term, it can impact the quality of the sperm, but in the long term, it will lead to diabetes. If it's unaddressed, that is very much what's going to happen. And there have been studies that show this. If you are diagnosed with infertility, but those factors aren't addressed, the increased risk of all-cause mortality down the track, say 15 years, 10 years, 15 years down the track, is much higher in the couples or the individuals who have suffered or have experienced an infertility diagnosis earlier in their lifetime. So we know that these things they're not just, oh, whoops, can't have a baby, or, oh, we're having miscarriages. Like there are real health concerns for the future when these aspects are not addressed.
Wow. So it sounds like struggling with fertility could be almost like a symptom of a deeper underlying health condition.
Absolutely. And that you nail it on the head.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before. And so you mentioned this piece, for example, about insulin resistance or diabetes. From your vast experience with couples, are there specific issues or pieces that men should look out for in their life to determine, oh, do I have fertility issues, or will this lead me towards infertility?
Yeah, I think that yes is the answer. And what is an even better question from a perspective of it being it kind of coming first is, what is getting in the way of me being able to be fertile? Right.
Okay.
I think that really is the critical question, because the fact is normal is misconstrued these days, which is quite fascinating if you think about it, right? This is what my patients experience all the time. They come to me, they say, look, I've done all these tests, I've done all these things, and the doctors tell me everything is normal. And I go, let's really understand what normal means, because normal is you have sex, you get pregnant, you have a baby, and we're no longer having this conversation. That's normal. Anything else other than that tells me that we are talking about a variation of what's normal, which means that it may not necessarily be completely abnormal, but for that person, it's not normal. Mm-hmm. Because if we really think about what normal means you're going to have sex, you're going to have a baby. Isn't that what we were taught in like whatever classes we took when we're at school, right? That you have, if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant and all of these things. And that is true. And the general population, the average number of months that it takes for a couple to get pregnant at peak fertility is 3 months. If that hasn't happened, it's because there are underlying factors that are getting in the way. So that's where that question is so critical of going, okay, if I'm having or experiencing a variation of normal, which is the test results are all within range, but I am not getting pregnant after unprotected intercourse for 12 months, which is the technical description of infertility, then what is getting in the way of that? What are the questions we need to ask and answer? Because if you are experiencing long-standing time to pregnancy or the inability to keep a healthy pregnancy to term, there is more that needs to be uncovered. And I think that's really the critical thing. Men don't usually get tested. They don't usually even get tested properly. If they go to a doctor and say, I'm having difficulty affecting a pregnancy, my partner's not getting pregnant, we're trying, or we've experienced miscarriages, most doctors won't actually test the man as to why these miscarriages to be happening. And it could be an overgrowth of microorganisms in the semen. We don't know, because that hasn't been tested. And so it's about looking at all of those factors that, okay, a semen analysis is the bare minimum. And sometimes there's a lot of stigma around men getting a semen analysis because they think that if they get a semen analysis and their semen or their sperm is not as good quality as it could be, it means that they're not as much of a man. To be honest, I think that a man is very much a man if he can actually face whatever challenges that he faces and faces it front on and actually goes and has a semen analysis and go, okay, right, what are the results? What do we need to do about it? As opposed to hiding under the covers going, oh, I don't want to know if I have a poor semen analysis result. And look, I'm not making fun of men because it's a real thing. And I see this in my clinic all the time. I had a conversation with a couple last week that I was just thinking, my God, seriously, man up. And that conversation was very much about this. He's making all this fuss, right? His partner has experienced more than 3 miscarriages. He's making all this fuss about being tested because he's scared that we're going to find something that isn't what he wants to see. Rather than saying, hey, you know what? I actually don't want to have a baby. He's making up all these things about, oh, no, I don't want to be tested. Oh, this is terrible, or that is whatever. And I think that there has to be a conversation here in a partnership perspective when you might be scared, you might be afraid of what it is that you will find. But if you don't find it, you can't do anything about it. And if you don't want to do it because really deep down, you're not with the right person, or you actually don't want to have a baby, those two are the biggest issues that arise in a couple relationship when people are having difficulty conceiving and having a pregnancy to term. It's not the actual issue, it's what's underlying that issue that they can't be face front on and honest about to address with their partner.
Yeah, I appreciate that you're sharing this because as you were speaking, this thought was coming up to me of how often is it that it's really a physical, biological component, and how often is it there's a deeper piece that's unfolding, whether I don't know if it's like woo, but to get into that piece of if I don't really want to be with this partner long term, if there's a piece of me that doesn't actually want to have a kid, is that showing up often in couples that you see as they're entering this place?
Look, here's the thing that I find happens a lot. I think sometimes people are in relationships that they don't want to be in for a long time, and it's comfortable enough. Right? Yeah. It's too good to leave, too bad to stay, but they stay because it's comfortable enough. And whether one thing precedes the other, right? I don't have the answers to that. I'm sure that there are psychosomatic, and we see this in our clinic, psychosomatic responses to partners and not wanting to have babies. But initially, the way that it's most likely to rise in a conversation or a discussion is in these cognitive dissonance. It's actually the way that I would describe it. You want to pick fault with something so that you don't have to really face up to the fact of the reality, which is, I don't want this. And if I don't do the things that I can do to optimize my chances of affecting a pregnancy, we can't say that it's because I don't want to be in this relationship. I can just say that there was an issue, and it just prolongs that whole kind of situation. Yeah. And for women, it's problematic because women have a very finite fertile window, right? Like this couple, let's just imagine that I'm making the story up and it's not a real couple, but they're both the same age. And so what happens is that they're both 40 and just over 40. But the man, he can go on and not address this for another 20 years and everything is going to be fine in terms of still being able to conceive. Yeah, of course, male factor fertility and sperm quality decreases over the years, as do women. However, it declines in a much slower state than the female fertility situation where, by age 45, it's very unlikely, it's still possible, but very unlikely that it's just going to be a breeze to get pregnant and keep a pregnancy.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that for the male fertility, because there is that piece of women obviously go into menopause and there is that really clear age. for men, when does that start to happen? I mean, I know men can be pretty old and still having babies, but at what point does the sperm start to degrade? It's possible.
And here's what's interesting. It's the female egg that's responsible for fixing a lot of the DNA fragmentation and errors that occur in sperm of older men, right? And so basically what happens is that Hugh Hefner was able to get a 20-year-old pregnant because she was 20 years old, not because he had 90-year-old sperm.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, the younger the woman, the more energy her mitochondria in the egg is going to have to be able to fix those errors in the sperm.
Yeah.
An older egg from an older woman, say at 40, doesn't have that same stamina that a 20-year-old egg had. Okay. And so basically, a 90-year-old is very unlikely to be able to affect the pregnancy in a 40-year-old.
But his chances of affecting a 20-year-old are higher.
Much higher.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. So the younger the woman, the more her egg is able to fix the errors of an older sperm. Okay. And the toxicity and the damage and all of those things. Whereas for an older female, okay, so a woman that is closer to 40, 42, 43, you would need much younger sperm. And even so, it might be more challenging. So that's when it becomes a situation where and that's also why sometimes men feel like, oh, we don't need to rush, darling. Maybe if you want to have a 20-year-old have your children, that might be true. Yeah. But if you have a partner that is about the same age as you, not so true. Because you're both aging at around the same kind of rate, which essentially means that by age 35 onwards, it's going to be harder for a man and a woman with a partner of the same age.
So in that instance, could a man freeze his sperm if he has a partner with the same age? He could. Okay.
Absolutely. And actually, in fact, that is much more, I guess it's much more effective than freezing a woman's egg. Because egg freezing really was developed for girls at puberty who were going to have to go through chemotherapy and become sterile as a result of having had cancer and having had to have treatment. They started freezing those eggs and parts of the tissue of the ovaries for those kinds of girls or women who essentially were going to have to go through that major life transition very early. However, these days, we're getting advertisements to women who are 35, 40 plus having frozen eggs, which is not really that effective for yielding a pregnancy. It becomes complex, convoluted, and very expensive. To have a baby through IVF as it is, given the number of failures, it's almost 70% of a single IVF cycle fails, which basically means that it's a lot. Like 70% fail, not 70% work, 70% fail, right? If you look at how many cycles you need to have close to an 80% live birth rate through IVF, it's about 8 cycles. And an average IVF cycle is about $17,000 in the US.
Oh my gosh.
We're not talking spare change here. Yeah. There's all of those factors as well that need to be taken into consideration when we're talking about fertility and when we're talking about when to affect that change and go about doing it. And so hence why it's so vital for men just to be honest, right? And for women too. Sometimes a woman is with a man just because she wants his sperm, like just because she wants to have a baby, not because she wants to be with that person. And so that creates all sorts of issues. And I've seen this many times in my clinic, like over the years, like literally she hates his guts, but is with him because she wants to have a baby. And it's
horrible in its own way to experience that. Yeah. And this piece that you mentioned a few moments ago about the man not wanting to have the test or almost having this fear around like acknowledging or understanding his fertility. And I think for both men and women, this ability to have babies, it's this innate piece of us. And we attach so much meaning to it of, oh, women are supposed to be mothers and men it's create and provide. And so there's so much meaning that comes with this. And I'm wondering for a man maybe that is wanting to have children, or maybe he's in a dynamic where he's starting to explore fertility with his partner. I'm just thinking of actions that someone listening could take. Like, what would be some ways to improve the chances of having that fertility? Maybe like the goals so that they don't end up having to have these tests or really dive into that. But what are things that they can start doing to improve their vitality?
What comes to mind for me when you ask this question is the importance of men indulging me for a moment as I answer it.
Stay with us, you guys.
Absolutely, because this will be worth your while. Just hold on. What I think is important for men is to imagine that they would be the ones carrying that baby. Because as much as that is difficult to conceptualize, imagine if, as a man, you were holding right now, gestating that baby that you want to bring out into the world at this point. What are the things that you know you would absolutely start doing or you would absolutely stop doing to ensure that your baby had the healthiest possible start in life? Because right now, within you, you already have 50% of that little baby that you may want to create at some point down the track, right? So it's not a situation where you have no responsibility. You have 50% of that little baby already inside you, and you have that responsibility. So all of the things that you would absolutely start doing or absolutely stop doing to create the healthiest possible environment for your baby that is developing in your womb, right, is essentially the same things that you would start doing way before you wanted to affect the pregnancy. And why is that? Because it takes many months for the sperm that you ejaculate today to be formed, okay? So it takes 3 to 4 months for a sperm cycle. And to see changes in sperm and improvements in the quality of sperm sometimes can take 3 to 4 sperm cycles. So that's like over 12 months.
Yeah.
So even though a sperm cycle is 3 to 4 months, times that by 3 to 4, right, which is sometimes the length of time that it takes for us to see real change and real improvement in sperm. An egg cycle, an egg maturation cycle is about 12 months long. So that kind of fits in for both men and women in terms of how that happens. But for that maturation cycle in a female, you only get 1 egg. Whereas for that maturation times 3 cycle for a man, you get millions of sperm. Yeah. But that is assuming that health is as good as it could be. Because if it's not, I often also say that a healthy body is a fertile body. So if you're not as healthy as you could be, then of course we're going to have factors that are going to be impacted when it comes to fertility. So for men and women, if you're wanting to prepare, if you're wanting to ensure, prevent and prepare, right, the best possible environment for the egg to mature and the sperm to form, then that's what people need to do. They need to act pregnant now to get pregnant later. And really focus on it from a perspective of you may not want to do this today, but when you do want to, you will be ready. And then, of course, there's a whole lot of other pieces that goes into that equation, like timing conception effectively, knowing your cycle, men also being aware of that because that also makes a difference. And there's so many other pieces that goes into this, but the foundation of it all is really focus on being the absolute healthiest version of yourself, because no matter what, that is going to enhance your chances of conceiving when you're finally ready and keeping a healthy pregnancy to term in the best possible way.
So I guess what would be the prescription you would prescribe to a man?
Yeah, look, that's a great question because it's going to be individualized as well, right? But if we were to look at it across the board, absolutely focusing your meals on vegetables and protein. If we were to talk about the things that you would quit, I mean, one of the things that you would quit to be healthy, smoking, doing drugs, alcohol, junk food, environment like occupational hazards, like super toxic environments and hobbies, for work and all of those things. All of those factors are going to be important. And from that, spring a whole lot of other things, right? So then you would look at, from an individual's perspective, what am I faced with in my day to day? What are my exposures like? And then you would disentangle all of that. Men tend to have occupations that are more toxic than females, typically.
And when you say toxic, is that like the physical environment, or like what does that mean exactly?
So basically, men are more likely to be mechanics, are more likely to be exposed to chemicals in their work environments, are more likely, and of course, these days there are office workers in all sorts of industries. However, it's about looking at that too. What are the occupations that are mostly men dominated that are typically also very highly toxic from an environmental perspective, like their personal environment, right? Because that will make a difference. Also, if men smoke, if they drink alcohol, if they eat a lot of junk food, all of those factors have been heavily studied now, looking at how they impact sperm. And they do really impact sperm. Also, for workers people who work in offices or drivers or those kind of environmental type of exposures of sitting all the time, the reason that the testicles hang a couple of centimeters from the body is because they need to be cooler than the rest of the body. And so by sitting all the time, what happens is that you are going to be increasing the heat to the testicles. If you are a farmer, you're going to be sitting on engines typically. If you ride motorbikes, if you're a cyclist, all of those things are going to have an impact on the testicular heat that you're going to have on a day-to-day basis. And if your wife tells you that you should sit on ice or yes, you should, right? Because that could, if you have low motility or morphology issues, that is absolutely going to also arise from the fact that you are overheating the testicles.
Interesting.
Boxer shorts versus briefs, like that's another thing that a lot of times it's very easy to implement and makes a huge difference. Wearing boxer shorts where the legs are open so that the testicles can actually hang is going to be ideal when it comes to keeping the cool environment that the testicles need to produce healthy sperm. So all of those different things, like the things that you would add, and this is why I say, think about it like you were pregnant, because the things that I just talked about, if your wife was pregnant, if your partner was pregnant, would you like be over the moon about her working as a mechanic or working in an environment that's highly toxic or smoking or doing drugs or drinking? No, we know that those things are definitely things that are going to negatively impact the development of a baby in the womb. And it impacts the development of the baby even before conception occurs because of the way that it impacts those cells. So the things you would add are your green leafy vegetables, you're basing your meals on vegetables and protein, lots of filtered water, because again, exposure of drinking either bottled or non-filtered water can negatively impact the hormones for both men and women and will impact the ability to conceive. All of the things that you would do, like exercise, ideally not ever on a main road, because the amount of toxins that you inhale as a result of running, walking, or cycling on a main road is definitely going to negatively impact health and your sex cells. And so basically, those are all things that you'd want to moderate. But and that's the tip of the iceberg, because like I said, for certain individuals, there might be other things. There might already be biochemical pathways that are out of balance that need to be addressed from in different ways, from nutritional prescriptions to supplementation, herbal medicines. All of those things are things that we use in a very customized way for the patients that we treat. But what I also see these days, which is interesting, is like you go online and you Google things and people like start taking 20 different things that actually don't make a difference to their health or their fertility, but it's just because it's some gimmick on the internet. So it's important to be really clear about what are the things that are really important for me personally, and that really based on evidence, based on science, that are going to make a difference. That's going to be really important. But from a self-care perspective, all of those things that we've talked about and anything that kind of comes out of that, right, is going to be critical.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you have kind of view it from this lens of if my wife or my partner was pregnant, what I want them doing, working, driving a tractor or working as a mechanic or running on the road where they're inhaling all of this stuff. Yeah. So that's a great kind of
smoking or drinking, all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a great start. I'm curious, as you were just walking through all of these things, this question came to my mind of like, when it comes to actually being intimate and having sex, is there anything that a man should consider for that fertility component in this space of actually engaging in sex with someone?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'll say is yes, lubrication and the right kind of lubricant, because a lot of these kind of KY jelly and all of those kinds of, all those kinds of lubricants actually kill sperm. Okay. Or they stop it from swimming effectively. So there is sperm safe lubricants that are important to use. And of course, as we know, having sex when a woman is not lubricated enough and or doesn't have the right kind of lubricant is not enjoyable and pleasurable anyway. And therefore we want to refrain from doing that. But then also using the right lubricant is really important, and saliva kills sperm. So saliva shouldn't be used in the context of actually wanting to get pregnant and be as fertile as possible. Shouldn't be the lubricant of choice. Okay. So actually getting a proper lubricant that is sperm safe is going to be the number one thing that I would definitely recommend in this situation. The other thing that I think is really important for men to consider in that process, and for women to consider more than anything else, is that as much as when a woman starts to want to get pregnant, particularly when this is driven by the woman, right? There is this tendency of just making the man like, okay, this is it. This is the time you've got to perform, right?
Yeah.
And there is absolutely nothing better for a man to start to develop sexual dysfunction than that kind of approach. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, it is not going to be conducive to a great sex life to be telling your partner, this is it, perform now, on demand, right? But I think that men also need to take responsibility for understanding a woman's cycle and when she might be fertile, and taking responsibility for making that whole engagement together a mutual responsibility zone, right? Where both partners can actually, he's aware that, okay, ovulation's coming up. She doesn't have to tell him. And he could be proactive about preparing the environment, the space, the seduction, the things that I'm sure you talk about a lot on this podcast, right? That they can just go marathon the podcast episodes that you've done on all of these topics, which are essential for ensuring this connection, for ensuring this kind of mutually enhancing experience that should be a conception attempt, right? Sex for pleasure on a whole other level. And that's really how both partners really ideally need to be orchestrating this encounter, right? As opposed to it just being very like, okay, this is it. This is the time. Just get in there, do your thing.
Yeah, I love that you share that. From the men that I have spoken with who have been in situations where they're trying to get pregnant and not necessarily succeeding, and them feeling almost, I'm just this like sperm machine, and sex is no longer what it once was. And it seems once it reaches that point, it is even harder to conceive. And I would imagine that the connection and the level of love that's shared in those sexual encounters is shifted. So I love that you mentioned this piece about that. There's a fertility, or not even fertility, just like a period tracking app called Flow, FLO. And they have an option on there where you can share it with your partner. So it's more of a collaboration. So it's beautiful because then the man knows, oh, she's on her period. Like, here's what I can expect. Or, oh, she's about to be ovulating. This is an opportunity for us to connect more, have more intimate sex, all of that. So it's
absolutely. Yeah. And to be honest, it's the smart thing to do. It's the proactive thing to do. Certainly the smartest thing to do, because if you're aware that she is at a particular time in her cycle, there are probably conversations you already know will cause a fight by you starting. So just pick your battles. And I think that so many people talk about this, and yet I think that it's so few the people who actually take this on board and do it. If you know that your partner is going to be much more responsive to enjoyable sexual interaction by you doing the dishes and letting her go and have a shower before you, then do it. Like whatever it is that it's going to take. And when it comes to fertility, it's the same thing, right? It's not a situation where it is the woman that has to drive it all and has to explain it all and has to, quite frankly, do it all. Like what? We're here to get pregnant, to carry the baby, to take care of the baby, to breastfeed the baby. It's exhausting, right? And so especially when we're talking about secondary infertility, where there is already a child in the equation and we're going for a second or third or whatever, and it is a couple's desire combined. Therefore, it has to be a mutual kind of putting into the relationship as opposed to just continuously extracting from it.
Yeah.
And that if people approached relationships in that way, there would be so many happier marriages out there.
Yeah. No, I love this. You're bringing the heat. It's great. I mean, but these are things that
it's the almost 25 years of experience seeing this conversation like day in, day out.
Yes. Yeah. It's very clear that you truly have so much knowledge in this space after 25 years in working with over, what'd you say, 140,000 couples. It's incredible. And I know that it's been a joy to connect with you, and there's so much more. If anyone listening is curious about even more information on how to become more vital, become more fertile as an individual or as a couple, where can they learn more from you? I know you have a program specifically geared towards this. Where should they go?
So the first thing I would recommend is getting my book free on YouTube or Spotify. If they search Fertility Breakthrough, Overcoming Infertility and Recurrent Miscarriage, when other treatments have failed, or search my name, Gabriela Rosa, in the book, they will find that on Google. We also have a program that is free. It's called the Fertility Challenge. And if they go to my website, they will be able to find more about that. It's called fertilitybreakthrough.com. But like I said, if you Google my name, Gabriela Rosa, Gabriela-Rosa, Gabriela Rosa with one L, and fertility, you will find lots and lots and lots of resources and things, and me in every era of my life as well, delivering all of us.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, I know that this topic it can be sensitive and hard to look at. It's uncomfortable and something that I think a lot of us really hold close and don't want to share publicly. So I appreciate you diving into this work and having so much information to share with all of the men listening today, whether they're trying to have a kid right now or thinking about it in the future. If they want to be that Hugh Hefner 90-year-old having that baby, there are options out there and they can come to you. So, yeah, Gabriela,
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Naked Connection. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Trust me on this, your sex life and that special someone in your life will thank you for it. And if you really love the show, please take a moment and leave a 5-star review or a written review and let me know what you think. It would mean so much to me and this show. Until next time, happy connecting.